Jai Hind, Jai Bharat, and welcome to Dev Talks. This is Aadi. Once again, I have the pleasure and the privilege of hosting Vice Admiral B. Kannan, who's going to talk to us something which I haven't spoken, I haven't read, and I haven't heard many people referring to: the safety of India's undersea cables. Why I bring this subject up? Recently, the Chinese did a little bit of a naughty business with one of the Taiwanese islands, Matsui. They went in and cut off all the cables in the mid, middle of the night or broad daylight, whatever, but they did what they did. Do we have such vulnerabilities? Let's try and understand that. Sir, thank you so much for coming on to Dev Talks for the second time and bringing up another very interesting subject. And I must say, we are before the premiere of the first show, a lot of people wrote to me and said, this is something that Dev Talks has never done. And they actually said, well done, and hope, they hope for a great interaction during the Chips episode. So, guys, if you've not seen the Chips one, please do watch that. That's an eye opener, as will this be. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you very much, Sachin. Uh, Good afternoon to you. And we have an interesting topic to discuss today. We are living today in a digital world. And for us, internet connectivity is an absolute essential today, wherever we are, whether it's an office or at home or you're on a holiday somewhere. You would like to have connectivity to the internet. While this has been ensured adequately all over India by land run cables. In fact, India has got something like 34 lakh kilometers of fiber optic cables run length and breadth of the country by different agencies. There's BSNL, there's RailNet, there's Geo, there is Airtel. So many organizations have run fiber optic cables for their network operations. And I think fairly we have covered most of the areas of the country. Maybe it's in some parts of rural India and some places where there is a lot of mountains, etc. We could have a little bit of poor connectivity. But if you have to leave India and get connected to the, let's talk about our islands first. Let's say to Andamans and to Lakshadweep Islands, we could reach only by satellite till August 20. In August 20, the government laid the first undersea cable to our island territories towards Andamans and some seven islands there. From Chennai, from the east coast, it was laid. It was laid by BSNL, and it got operationalized in the last quarter of 2020. And since then, Andamans has also got good connectivity on internet, the rest of India, of course, with the rest of the world. Uh, the earlier connectivity of through satellite has got its own limitations as compared to undersea. We can touch upon that a little later. Uh, as far as Lakshadweep is concerned, it is still through satellite. We don't have an undersea cable operational to Lakshadweep as of now, but by end of the year, it's expected that cable also will get operationalized. It's being laid by a Japanese firm called NEC, and they would connect a group of 11 islands from Lakshadweep to Kochi, which is the nearest city where the cable can land, as they say in this particular technology. So I just talked about our undersea cables for our domestic use to our island territories, with the cables landing at Chennai as well as in Kochi. But our connectivity to neighboring countries, say Nepal, is through land. Of course, Nepal gets some connections from China as well. Uh, Bhutan is completely from India. Uh, Chinese internet connectivity has not reached Bhutan as of now. Bangladesh, in fact, our connection to Bangladesh is to Assam, and it is not for giving connectivity, but for taking connectivity. Bangladesh has got access internet capacity than what they can use, because they have connected up a undersea cable from Chittagong. So they have given us, they have leased out some lines to us so that our northeast region can get some internet connectivity using the land cables towards Bangladesh and thereafter from Bangladesh by sea. But to all other destinations, we have to use undersea cables. So undersea cables are very much part of our international communications, be it for internet, be for WhatsApp, be for whatever other access you are taking on internet for. So it's a very important infrastructure which links up countries around the world. It is sort of a neural network. It's invisible to us because it's lying on the seabed, but it's so vital. And if any damage takes place to this particular set of cables, then we have to worry about how we'll be able to have connectivity with many other countries, which are so vital for our economic activities, for our banking services, for travel, tourism, and so on. And even if you have to send a mail to your relative in US or a WhatsApp message to US, it goes through the undersea cable. So undersea cables are very much required for the quality of life which you are presently having with the support of internet connectivity. So necessity is absolutely essential, and we have to ensure these are safeguarded and they don't suffer any damage. At the same time, there is no machinery, government machinery, which is protecting the undersea cables as a part of their tasking. Is not there. So undersea cables are left on the seabed, and we hope that it doesn't get damaged either through some negligent fishing, because they use some trawlers at some point of time and they trawl the seabed and they may damage the cables, or it could be natural disasters, or it could be malicious action by somebody else who can damage your cables and disrupt your internet for quite some time. We'll talk about how things have happened in this aspect in the last few years around the world, and how people have worked out methods by which we can ensure a higher level of accessibility and safeguard these assets which are silently lying on the seabed.
I mean, just the sheer factor that there are so many cables kind of is for a non-technical person is going to be quite amazing, sir. Because a non-technical person says, "Yeah, satellite. My phone is connected directly. The phone call goes there." And because the previous narrative was that because we were connected by cables, it used to take that much time to actually communicate. uh, I wonder if I could indulge you in a minute that, when you used to make an international call, when you said hello, you had to actually wait for the hello to reach there and the response to come back to you. Uh, it didn't really strike, and everybody thought, okay, satellites have come in, and that's why the communication has become faster. But it's quite an amazing thing. So, sir, India's setup, and we are connected to the rest of the world through these cables, as you've very, very rightly said. What is this network and who handles this network for India? What's the whole
So
game?
yeah, so before you let's look at who are the people who are giving rendering this service. Let's look at what had happened 40 years back, right? Even 30 years back, we didn't have fiber optic cables. We had only coaxial cables, and that had its own limitations. So during the periods when coaxial cables were laid, you did have problems of uh, loss of time or delay,
Lag.
or what they call latency in the communication. But they got completely overcome. I would say completely overcome, largely overcome by use of fiber optic cables. which got developed sometime in late 80s, and by early 90s you had land-based fiber optic cables, which are not very thick, just about 10 mm
Yeah,
dia,
those
including.
orange cables that are there all
That's
around.
right. Yeah, that is including, that is a protection. So inside that is a set of fiber optic cables, and undersea cables, which are again fiber optic cables essentially, but they come with a lot of protection, not only to make sure they withstand high static pressure, which they have to which they'll be subject to when they're lying on the seabed, because seabed is about an average, let us say, about 3,000 meters world over, if you take. So the cable has to lie there, and it will be very cold, of course, which will make the cable joints contract a bit, and it also have to withstand the marine environment. So these marine cables, which have been developed world over in the last 30 years, have been largely done by three companies in the world. One is called Subcom, which is in US. One is NEC from Japan, and other is Alcatel from France. 90% of the world's 430 cables laid till today. When I say a cable has been laid, Chennai to Andamans is one cable. Okay, Kochi to Lakshadweep will be another cable. But there are cables which start from Japan and land up to UK. They may stop in between, they may have landing stations in between. It's not one complete single run, but it's called as one cable because the owner of the cable is the same, and the service provider in the cable is also from the same agency. So there are about 425 430 cables laid as of now, and India has 17 cables landing in 5 cities. Three of them are on the west coast. In fact, sorry, four of them are on the west coast, and one is on the east coast. East coast is Chennai. West coast is, you have Bombay, you have Cochin, Trivandrum, and I'm including Tuticorin also on the west coast. And these are the landing stations. So when a cable lands in a particular shore, it comes to a huge technical complex where there are a large number of equipment uh, which handle the traffic coming from all the hinterland fiber optic cables which land up there, and then it is passed on to different destinations through the cable, and it gets dispatched. So if you see the speed at which you are sending WhatsApp to USA today, it has traveled through an undersea cable for so many thousands of kilometers, and it reached your friend in USA in less than a second or two. So fiber optic cables have enabled very speedy communication through the undersea cables, and they are our neural network for international communication, and we have to ensure that it is safe. You did mention about what happened in Taiwan, between China and Taiwan. I'll come to that little slightly later. But before that, India is a very it's got a unique status in undersea cable fraternity. One, our geographical locations in the Indian Ocean uh, permits cables to just have a stop over there and then continue their journey to whichever destination they go. Second, when they stop over, or what they call as landing, when they land, they're also accessing 1 billion, almost 1 billion now, internet users from India. Presently, it's about 93 crores of internet users are there in India. So you find that there's a market when they land in India, which can be accessed by the cable. And after all, the cable owner, he's looking at how much traffic it is going to have, because he is going to get his money from the amount of traffic he is handling for the various service providers. So he would like to definitely have an access to the 1 billion user market, and of course geographical location. And third and most important, I think the maritime security around India is fairly well organized, well structured. Uh, you must be aware that there is a domain awareness, maritime domain awareness center in Delhi, in Gurgaon somewhere, and from their location of all ships um, which are entering, transiting, leaving the Indian coasts, and they're all mapped very accurately. So there is a fair amount of comfort for cable owners that here is an area where there is some surveillance, and if somebody has to cut your cable, he has to come either on surface of the water or underwater, mostly on surface of water to start with. So there's a comfort that this area has got some good network of surveillance, and thereafter you could uh, continue with your operations fairly uninterrupted. While cables do suffer damage due to, as I told you, negligent fishing or some other aspect which inadvertently which has happened, and they get repaired. The repair takes some time because cable which is damaged has to be lifted from seabed and spliced on board a ship and then lowered back. It's something like 2 to 3 weeks minimum. Depends on how far it is from your coast. A ship, a special ship, has to go there, lift the cable from the seabed, put it on its deck, cut the piece which is and remove it, and put another piece which they would have carried. So all this takes time. First of all, to get the ship to that location itself takes time, and we don't have such ships in India. There are no Indian flag ships which render this service. We have to get it from either from Middle East or from Singapore side. Okay, so coming back to the security aspect. So when the cables are landed on the coast, as I told you, there is a technical complex where these cables are terminated on a whole lot of communication equipment, controllers and routers and servers, etc., who channelize the land, uh, hinterland traffic towards the sea, and then they send it. It is fairly well protected. That area is fairly well protected. It has to be, and it's easy for us to protect a vulnerable point on our coastline, which is located on the land. But
Online, yeah.
once the cable leaves the coastline, it is not having any separate safeguard mechanism. It is left to the vagaries of weather, of course, and thereof lies on the seabed. Since the cable has to bear a lot more weight at the shore end, it is thicker. It's something about 60 mm in dia. So that cable is reinforced and ruggedized, and therefore, to cause any damage to that part of the cable, which is closer to your shore, is not easy. But as you go towards the sea, let's draw the line as territorial water. Let's say as you leave the territorial water and get into international water, then the cables become thinner, something like 25 millimeter, 30 millimeter is the dia of the cable. It lies on the seabed. And normally these cables are laid in a trench made on the seabed by the ship, which has got a specialized equipment for doing it. So I would think uh, cables lying on this international waters, of course, it gives ready-made access to anyone. It's international water, so it is freely accessible to anyone who wants to come. Would be a little difficult because the depth will be more, and it is put in a trench. You'll take it out of the trench and then cut it if you want to do that subversive action. While closer to the coast, It may be easier to do with some fishing trawler or some other um, commercial vessel which has got some specialized equipment for cutting cable. I really don't know what type of ships were deployed off Taiwan, Matsu Island. The water depth was only about 125 to 140 meters where the cables got cut. So it is a depth where divers can reach with some specialized type of uh, air bottles where they have a mix of oxygen with some other gas, and they are able to reach and perhaps be on task for a few hours if they are coming from the ship, which would have to be anchored around that point uh, to carry out the subversive action. For us in India, the situation is almost similar. The depth of waters around India, both on the east coast and west coast, in the territorial waters of India, the depths don't exceed around 200 meters. So it is within the reach of um divers who can be deployed for any
Saboteurs.
such operation. So we have to be fairly aware of this particular issue. Now, what type of equipment will be required to cut a cable? I would be presume it will be some sort of a mechanical gadget with some hydraulic pressure with which a cable is cut. It is possible to imagine that it could be lowered from a ship and operated on either hydraulic or pneumatic pressure, which can be fed from the ship, and it can be done in a few hours' time. So we
What's
have to
the
be aware.
Sorry, sir, but what's the casing? I mean, since you're talking about cutting, just to
Yeah,
complete the
it,
conversation,
it,
what's the
it,
casing made up
it,
of?
it- yeah. The outer casing is absolutely something which will provide waterproofing first, right? It is some
Plastic.
sort of yes, plastic with some silicone, this that, etc. Special compound. But as you go inside, it has got armored wires which are around the center point, and right in the then there is another layer which will protect the fiber optic cable, which is well at the center of the cable. The fiber optic cables are at the center of cables. Normally they have about 10 pairs to 16 pairs of fiber optic cores inside that. While I say this, I want to tell you that while a cable is laid with, let us say, 16 pairs of fiber optic cores, it is normally connected only to 8 or 10, not because they're keeping the rest for any redundancy. The rest is kept for uh, keeping the demand versus supply on the number of cores which
Positive
are
side.
the international market. So that is a very well guarded secret, which is not known outside the particular service provider. How many cores are still there? Because that is what is potential market potential is, so that he is able
Yeah.
to capture more market. So leave that aside. Now come back to the cable. So there is a fair amount of vulnerability to the cables which are laid around from Indian coast. There are 5 cities from there it goes. The route is fairly well known. If the cable is leaving Bombay and it is going towards Oman, let's say example, the route is fairly well clear. They're all laid by special ships which have got GPS controlled navigation. So there could be some sort of intelligence gathering by which you know the exact route of the cable which is starting from India, whether it is to go towards the west or east. India has got about 17 cables now, which have landed, as I told you, from 5 cities. And the next 3 years, this number 17 will go to 22. There are 5 more cables getting added. One, of course, is to Lakshadweep. And apart from that, there are some cables of Geo which is coming from Singapore, and then it is going towards the west. And there are some cables which are networking uh, Myanmar and Bangladesh and India, Malaysia, etc. There's another network coming, but there are cables which are coming from Italy via Israel. I would like to make a mention of that particular cable. It's called Blue Raman. That cable is called Blue Raman. The Italy to Israel is called Blue, and from Israel, once it lands there, it is perhaps one of the first undersea cables by design which is running on land in Israel. And it leaves Israel and comes to Jordan, and then it enters the Red Sea and comes towards India. And that is called Raman, named after Professor C.V. Raman. Right. So, why did Israel do this? This cable is owned by Google. Why did they do it? The public statement is that they didn't want to come through Suez Canal. Rest all cables go through Suez Canal. But this one cable which has skirted Suez Canal and come through a little bit of uh, land territory and then come towards Red Sea and then come here. So these are the five new cables which are coming to India. So we'll have about 22 cables in another couple of years of time. But the number of landing stations are the same. So there are some uh, worries for us as far as their vulnerability is concerned. Obviously, we have to keep our territorial waters under close watch through our maritime domain awareness activities, and make sure that there are no ships which are unusual in their design, which are coming to this region uh, for um, for any subversive activity. Cable towards Andamans would be critical. I would think so. And the cable, which is also running to another destination, let me touch upon that. There's a cable which runs called SAFE. It is South Africa to Far East, which touches Mauritius and then Kochi. So, couple of years back, this cable was connected with a branch cable. That means you could take a branch off from the cable somewhere near Mauritius, and it was terminated in an island called Bay du Jacolet. It's in Mauritius only.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that has been done by a Chinese company. So, this branch off cable uh, is technically feasible to branch off and then, but how the branching off is taken internal to the cable is something which needs to be looked into. But there's a fear in the technical analysis which was done by government of India that somebody can just vacuum clean all the data which is otherwise going in the main cable. So you can take it out. It's called digital theft. You take out the entire data and then you do your analysis, and then so why have they done it in Mauritius? What is that worry about cables leaving Kochi and going to South Africa via Mauritius? Why should you look out branch cable in Mauritius for it? In my analysis, there's a reason. One, of course, you check out your technology, how well you can vacuum clean this, that, etc. But I'm sure that can be done in the lab. You don't have to go to a foreign country and set up a cable. There's another reason, as per me. There's a island called Agalege, north of Mauritius, where India is having its defense outpost. Agalage, where India is building an airstrip for maritime surveillance, as well as a naval jetty for ships to operate. Mauritius has given this on lease to us. It's north of Port Louis. So, if you are looking at what the operation, what the communications are going, whatever will be the routine communications which are sent via email or through some other electronic means through this undersea cable, which is meant for Agalage. It could be for even for logistic function support required for any ship coming there or any aircraft coming there, because after all they all have to reach from Mauritius. It's possible to know from the data which is flowing in the main cable. Agalage is still not commissioned. It is getting ready, all right. There are some satellite pictures of Agalage in the public media. So one can say maybe in a year or two it will become operational. So therefore, uh, it would be an effort by the Chinese company to make sure that they are already ready. They have with any sort of uh, effort required for digital theft of the data without cutting a cable. So you're not cutting a cable, but you're taking out the data. In fact, there are reports that fiber optic cables are being made with a back door. That's what the technical literature says, that you can have a back door through which you can take out the main data which is going in the cable. And I'll tell you why this is not difficult. Every undersea cable has an amplifier sitting inside the cable. It is there for every 100 kilometers. So if you've got 4,000 kilometers of cable, you can imagine there are 40 amplifiers one after the other, which is located inside the cable, and it's called an optical amplifier. What happens in the optical amplifier is very simple. Of course, it works on DC supply, which is fed from the landing station, which is separately supplied through the cable. And whatever data is coming from, let us say, downstream, it is read and retransmitted through another laser. Why? Because when digital data goes through a fiber optic cable, there is a little bit of attenuation. There is a little bit of deformation to the circuits also, which comes. So what you do is you retransmit it to make sure it has the original shape of the data. So if you can retransmit through one laser amplifier, you can also retransmit through two laser amplifiers in the cable. And the second laser amplifier can go to a port from which you can branch off, which is called the backdoor. So technologically, it has been reported that it is possible to extend your digital theft through a optical amplifier which has got an extra laser circuit. So you don't have to cut the cable. One doesn't have to cut the cable. You can do, it's literally eavesdropping and taking over the data, and then you can do your big data analytics on it, and then try and make some sense out of whatever data which has gone past it. Of course, the answer to this would be to make sure you have coded information, and make sure that it has got layers of security in the data structure itself. Uh, something very similar to an e-passport. If you have an e-passport, which is not there in India, but will
Mm.
come soon in a year
Coming
or
out,
so.
yes. Mm.
Yeah, many other countries have it. So when you read a e-passport, there's nothing great. It is like reading your debit card. Okay, simple. It's a chip inside the passport, which is red, and it gives your name, date of birth, this, that, etc. Right? but it is not written in plain language. It is written in some coded language. That is sent to another server, and those servers with their decoding network are only supplied to those airports or seaports where you have accepted the condition of that you will utilize it for genuine purpose. So it goes to one server where it is decoded, and then it is one layer of decoding. Then it goes to another server where it goes to another layer of server before you get the data in its normal form, and that comes back to the officer who is sitting there in the counter to check your passport. All this happens uh, behind his desk or behind the in the technical complex. So something like that is possible. You can have layers of decoding to be done before you get the data. So digital theft is a possibility, and one has to get worried about it. But that would mean that it is more in the crypto field of data digital communication, and not with the undersea cable. The undersea cable is a simple carrier. You send out something, it goes the digital form throughout to whichever destination it has to go. So as long as you prevent any physical damage to the cable, which happened uh, in 2008 for the first time near Egypt. It happened near Jeddah later, and it is feared it has happened in Matsu now. So, physical damage is one way of doing it. That's hard kill, but there are soft kill options also which have technologically emerged. So, on the whole, our communications to sensitive areas, and I would think Agalage is a sensitive area. Uh, we have to make sure that there are additional encoding and security layers incorporated in the data communication. For rest of the things, it is physical protection. Now, we don't have a method by which you can protect a cable lying on the seabed. It is just making sure, at least in our territorial waters, there are no suspicious movements of vessels which are not the usual type, but which have got some special equipment or special capability of some cranes or lowering some equipment down below whatever they have. So what has to be, and there are not many vessels of this variety which can be.
But
So you'll have to track them. You'll have to find. So to safeguard your vessel to your cables, there are two, three measures which have been identified. First is that you have a good intelligence network, which will keep telling you about movement of any vessels of this capability when they are leaving some port or some other harbor. So you in the internationally you should have some good networking on this. Second aspect is that you have very frequent checks, especially the shore end of the cables, well, that is where inadvertent damage takes place by fishing, and it can happen later when you start your sea mining, which will start in another 1.5 years time or 2 years time. India also will start mining all the polymetallic modules from the seabed, and they are all using mechanical fixtures which are dragged or which are going in picking up and then putting it and then taking up to the ship on the top. So it is possible that there would be some
damage. Yeah.
damage which we may not even realize, because it's not sea mining is not such a specialized area for us. We have done some de-risking of it by doing some R&D and some demonstration, but we can damage some of our own cables. Even installation of offshore windmills, which is going to happen in India very soon on the west coast, near Gujarat coast, near Tamil Nadu coast, which have got good wind farms, offshore wind banks, not farms, banks are there. Good wind velocity is there. So you'll have to make sure that whatever installation activity which is taking place, wherever it is taking place, and whatever mine piling and something else which is going to happen on the seabed, you make sure that you don't inadvertently cause damage to the sea cables. Like many times we have caused damage to our own land-based cables due to some negligence from people, or they're not aware of that cable is laid in the below the ground. So thing is that you have to make sure that there's a coordination between various agencies which are going to be operating in this uh, nearby waters, little territorial waters and little more. Whatever whoever is going to operate there, you keep a sharp lookout, as well as coordinate your own efforts to do it. And as I told you earlier, the intelligence. And the last point which I want to highlight is the risk assessment uh, for each cable landing station, be it Kochi or Tuticorin or let's say Trivandrum. The water depths around that is are well known to us. Of course, it is available in public domain as well. So the uh, type of offensive attack which can happen on the cable, one can estimate. This is the type which it has to be a diver, or it cannot be a diver because the depth is more. It has to be something lowered from a ship, right? So those sort of things can be uh, estimated, assessed, and you do a good risk assessment. So when a cable is laid, for all the cables laid from India, there are not many, there are only 20 odd cables laid from India. You do a good risk assessment. So this is the type of damage it can suffer, malicious action. And
Hmm.
then you look at what are the assets will be which will be deployed by that particular force, and how you can preempt it and then do it. Somebody has to work on it and then do it. But it's possible to do it along with the owner, because the owner is the person. I'll come to the ownership of the cable soon. Owner is the guy who knows the details of the cable and the exact route it has taken on the seabed. That data is with him. So he'll have to be taken on board for this risk assessment. And that also will help him to do a fairly good insurance of the cable which he has laid on the seabed. And the last point is there isn't any legal framework today uh, by which if somebody is caught doing this action of subverting it, there is not legal action if it takes place in international water, because assets lying on the seabed, if damaged by somebody else, and if you're very sure and you want to proceed legally, then I understand uh, UN Convention for Laws of Sea alone cannot support the legal framework. You have to have a domestic law which will which is linked to UN clause,
Yeah, yeah,
unclause,
yeah.
and then so I presume this will happen in India soon, because we are going to have offshore wind farms. So there are many steps to be taken towards reducing the vulnerability, or at least doing a risk assessment and
Hmm.
taking uh, corrective actions for it. Now, you ask who owns the cables. The government does not own any cables. All cables, including to Andamans or to Lakshadweep, are all owned by consortium of service providers. Recently, you find big tech companies, Amazon, Google, they all started laying their own cables because they've been
Hmm.
hiring cables till now, and the rent they pay is perhaps very
Enormous.
high. So it
Hmm.
is better to own a cable and lay it in the most safe manner. So if it has to avoid Suez Canal, so be it. Avoid Suez Canal and lay it through whatever. I'm just giving an example of Blue Raman. So big tech companies have started laying their own cables now in the last 2 3 years. The rest of the cables are laid by Geo, Airtel owns something, BSNL owns some part of it. There are many other telecommunication companies which they all join together because it's pretty expensive 1 kilometer of the cable costs something like $2 million. It could be more depending upon the type of cable to depth to which it has to be laid. If you have to lay a cable at 3,000 meters, the operations required are different. The ship required is different. Their services are different. So anything between $2 to $6 million are required for every kilometer. So highly capital intensive, but of course you will get your money back with the extent of uh, traffic which goes through your cable, and you're obviously you're interested in making sure the cable doesn't get damaged at all. So ownership of these cables are with private sector and a group of companies, and there are some Indian companies like Tata's are there, um, Jio is there, Airtel is there, BSNL has been dragged into it recently, and these are the companies which Arcom is there, Reliance Communication. In its earlier avatar was Arcom. I don't know, it's gone to some other name now. So
Telecommunications.
yeah, so uh, you have a whole lot of undersea cables uh, connecting up the whole world, and we have to make sure they are safe. And if they are not safe, then you will have uh, you will have your internet affect disrupted, and you will have uh, your economy affected, your banking services affected. But one more factor which I told you in the risk assessment, which I forgot to mention: when you lay a cable and you know it is going to lay traffic from, let's say, Kochi to South Africa, and it suffers some damage for whatever be the reason, the traffic which is coming to Kochi from the land, you have to send it to another point, let's say Tuticorin, and from there send through some other cable to some other destination, maybe in Mauritius, and from Mauritius it has to go to somewhere in Middle East. So this sort of changes to topology of the cable or your data stream can be done, and I'm sure this is the part of the contingency plan which you develop. I suffer a cut here, I will route my traffic or through this route via Cochin or via Bombay. I will route it, or via another cable which is going from Bombay, which is not suffered. And cable owners from the cable landing stations continuously monitor. Live monitoring of their cables are done for their health. If there's a break in the cable, the signals reflect back. In a fiber optic cable, it's light. So if there's a break or if there's a damage, the light reflects back, and it tells your computer the light is reflecting back after so many milliseconds. And so many milliseconds means so many hundreds of kilometers. So there's a damage 500 kilometers from here, something has happened. So this is live monitoring. The undersea cables are monitored live from the cable landing station by all companies to know what is their health. So it is possible for you to know immediately if there's a damage and react. So if you think there's a ship which has damaged your cable, or some saboteurs that damaged your cable 300 kilometers off Kochi, you come to know immediately within minutes, and it's possible for you to alert your security forces, be it Navy or Coast Guard or aircrafts, maritime aircrafts, to look at that spots where, because the person who has caused the damage cannot disappear immediately. He'll take time unless he moves underwater, which he cannot, which is unlikely. Let's temporarily rule out that portion that is not a submersible, and it is unmanned submersible or manned submersible which has caused it. But still, that has to be picked up by a surface ship. He can't be very far from the area of operation. Like in Matsu, they discovered that ships were around that place by about 3-4 miles. They could locate the ships which were there through satellite imagery, and they could say this ship was there. Whether it was involved in it or not, it's not clear. So it is possible to launch a immediate survey of the location, because the undersea cables are monitored live. is like ECG being taken of a patient. You will straight away alert, and then you can reach that place for a recce. You cannot go by surface, but definitely by air, you can reach that place very fast. So I think there's a fair amount of comfort factor in people who lay the cables, who own the cables, who get it laid, who operate it, that from India is not only a billion user market is available, but also there's a fair amount of security reach possible to any point which has suffered any damage due to any malicious action, or through, if it is a natural disaster, then you'll straight away come to know if it through your seismic detectors. So in our interest, undersea cables should lie there peacefully on the seabed without being disturbed. If there's anything else which you would like to know, I'm ready to share.
Yeah, I mean, so the interesting thing is everything is been turned into a military target today. And that's the whole thing. These are things that were made into global commons, and we've kind of forgotten all those terms. We've forgotten the space global common, we've forgotten the maritime global common and stuff like that. So do you see that the adversaries would start building capability of doing stuff like this in the future? Because now that when we are talking about multi-domain operations, this will form a part of it. So do you see the adversaries building up, adversaries, our friends, our allies, or whatever you may want to call it, countries around the world, developing technology to disrupt this kind of stuff in the future?
It has happened to some extent in Nord Stream. They blew up the gas pipeline. Of course, it was not
Oh,
internet cable. They blew the
yeah,
pipeline, and it affected economically the states which are receiving the gas otherwise, and they
true.
had huge amount of economic stress because of it. Of course, it caused some stress to Russia also because they couldn't sell their gas.
Hmm.
But the fact is, the assets lying in international waters, it is not physically possible to safeguard them throughout. But using technology, it's possible for us to monitor their health and reach out if there's a worry, if something has happened to them. And I'm sure this is an area which our planners would keep in mind, because these are easy ways of disrupting uh, economy, easy way of disrupting quality of life. You don't have to go for a full scale war. You start with all this in the beginning, which will affect your industrial activity or economic activity or banking services, and keep whole lot of people in the land unhappy because they're not having internet connection. So very important for us to make sure our contingencies should be well drawn up, monitoring should be good coordination should be there, and definitely not cause damage yourself, do some uh, unfettered sea mining or some wind farm installation which will cause some damage to it. So the government agencies and the undersea cable owners have to come on board together. There has to be some organizational sort of arrangement by which they are able to share their worries, their risk management, how it will be done, and some contingency plans, etc., have to be done. It is not an area which we have been very active in India. I would presume so, but I think it needs to be done. Um it makes our days and nights more peaceful, definitely.
There's just no question about it. It's quite a dangerous sort of a thing if you can just, I mean, get cut off from the rest of the world. That's something which I don't think anybody would.
Yeah, one,
You'd be
one more
back.
factor, one more factor, which I'm sure when you work out your contingency plans, uh, the depths of water around Indian
Mhm.
coast, uh, uh, at least for some distance, is all within reach of divers, and not, you don't require sort of a ship to be anchored there for just at least just for injecting and retrieving the people, yes, but otherwise you don't require some specialized ship to reach there, because you're not looking at anywhere near 500 meters. It's all less than that. It could be even much less than that in some areas. So you don't require. But if you're going to cut in the middle of the ocean, that requires submersibles and deployment. So it's not worth it. So you will only cut, if somebody wants to cut, they'll only cut very close to land where the water depth is less, and it is easy to mingle around with other ships which are in that area. But the cable designers have made the cable very thick at the land end. So cutting is not going to be all that easy unless you're going to blow it apart using explosives like they did in Nord Stream. So I'm sure in the days to come there'll be more discussions on this, and we will come to know that how these concerns are addressed. I'm sure it is already addressed to some extent,
Yeah, I guess
but
it's
we will get.
I guess it's just the factor that it's so difficult to cut it in the middle of the ocean. So that provides it a certain amount of safety and security because it's so deep and you gotta send somebody down there. You gotta have specialized equipment to do something like that. So it's probably gonna provide a little bit of a self assurance ki bhai, okay, fine, it's difficult to do, so it won't happen too often. So thanks so much. As usual, this was an eye opener. I mean, I never thought the world
Thank
of
you
these
very
cables
much.
was so big.
Thank you very much.
I,
And I really like this topic when I started researching on it, and I thought these are
it's
concerns which for a
amazing. Nobody,
country which
I mean,
is.
it's amazing. I personally never thought that the web of cables is that much, and it was quite a surprising because one doesn't think in those directions, because what is underground is underground. You don't kind of think about it.
It's
And when the
invisible.
Nord, yeah, it's invisible. When the Nord Stream got hit, a lot of people said, "Yeah, there are cables under the water." Okay, and curiosity started building up, and this now you've told a story which will connect us more into this hidden world with where these cables run all across the world, and I'm
No,
sure
and
it'll be
cables
a
run not only for internet, they also
yeah,
run for power. Once you set the windmills, power will come from the windmill to the land. And India is going to export power to Saudi Arabia very soon, maybe in a year or two. They're going to send power from India, big time power, to Saudi Arabia uh, through undersea cables, submarine cables. They're sending. Of course, it will be DC supply, not AC supply, and this is going to happen. So that is also another asset lying there, which can disrupt the life at the other end. Suddenly, if the mains is switched off because of
yeah,
some
of
cable
course.
got cut. Yeah. So these are very important assets which we need to keep track of. We can't afford to forget it after laying.
Oh yeah, okay. That's a point unsaid. So that's a point unsaid. Uh, Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure. The last one was an eye opener, and you've opened my eyes a little further with regards to technology, which I normally personally am. I'm just talking as a person. I'm a user and not a studier, but you've kind of given me the inquisitiveness to kind of look at these things a little more deeply when it comes into referrals or discussions, or for that matter, geopolitics. Thank you, sir, and I'm looking forward for the next very insightful discussion on technology or many other subjects which are out there for us to learn. Till next time, sir. Jai Hind.
Thank you. Thank you very much.